Alright, hello, time for the art critique. Today I'm thinking of doing it for a weapon. Can you guess which one? It's on one of these classes, yeah, it's a medic weapon, and it's the... let me show you, show stock items, there you go. It's the medic's syringe gun, spec item. So that's gonna be the art we're gonna critique today. As always, some disclaimers. I'm gonna just dive a little bit into game design, but this is nothing in depth. Mind the difference. This is not a game design discussion per se. And also, I'm following for this art critique Feldman's method. 4 steps: description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. That's what the Feldman's method is all about. On the description, I describe what I see. On the analysis, I talk about the elements of art. On the interpretation, I'm gonna interpret the creative vision behind this weapon. And on the judgment step, I'm gonna call this successful or unsuccessful work of art, basing myself on the principles of art. So let's begin. Description, what do I see? Wow, this is something unique, right? Is this some sort of gun, apparently? Alright. And it has some sort of mechanism, I guess, that propels a bunch of syringes, right? It's even the name of the gun, but visually we can see there are a bunch of syringes inside of a glass tube. And what else? It has many smaller parts that are assembled to make the gun, right? A lot of it is made out of metal. There are some screws there, over there. What else? Here, this will be the muzzle of the gun, the trigger down here, the handle, and yeah, I don't know what else we could say about it. It's apparently a gun that shoots syringes. Let's move on to the analysis then, because stuff like color and stuff are the elements of art. So for this art critique, I'm gonna be considering 8 elements of art. The common 7, which are lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and value. Those are the common 7, and like some authors, I'll be considering also points. So let's talk about points to begin with. Do we see any? Let's see if there are any points here for this artwork. Maybe there is one like over here, but I feel like it's more of kind of a dent. That would be either texture or form. The element of texture or form would be perhaps a better way to describe it. Is there one here? Maybe not. I don't know. I don't think I see any discernible points really. At most, this thing here, as I said. But I think that's not exactly it. That's more a small dent on the surface of it. That's what I'm going to be considering for this critique. So then let's move. Since there's no points to analyze, let's move on to lines. Let's see if we can find some lines, because for many Team Fortress 2 art there is a lack of lines. For example here, just because there is a separation between 2 sides doesn't mean there is a line separating them. So that's common for Team Fortress 2 aesthetics. Let's see if we can actually find some lines here. This thing here I believe is again more of a property of the forms here. Probably the form or space, or the use of space. Don't think we should. It's reasonable to call this a line. What else? There are some shadows with something like that also. You gotta be careful. What else? Here, this would be the value, light and darkness. Yeah, I don't think there is any proper lines here. What about this contour here? Is this? Should we call this a line? I think it's more of an effect of the texture of the gun again, or perhaps it's better to talk about textures when describing this part. I don't know, I think that's what I'm going to go for here. As with many Team Fortress short. So if I'm gonna be considering no lines here to analyze as well, finally shapes. Let's go to shapes, because for that one we're definitely gonna find something to analyze. For starters, by the way, shapes and forms might sound redundant, but shapes in an art critique, for an art element, shapes are always 2D, forms are always 3D, that's kind of the idea. So for the shapes, for example, and for 3D objects, different angles gives different shapes because of that. For here we have, for example, this somewhat trapezoidal shape here, for example, and over looking at it through this angle we have a hexagon here. Those are shapes. So what else? Considering the gun, there's a lot of like not straight shapes, but well, shapes with less curvature, you know, with lack of curvature. Geometrical shapes, perhaps we could say, not sure. So for example here it's like a rectangle through this angle, and throughout different angles it becomes closer to what's the shape I'm looking for here. To be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know. Either way, it's a polyhedron, I think, as we could say. What else? And either way, a lot of like rectangular-like, trapezoidal-like shapes on many parts through many angles. So here a hexagon. Here an exception. We have some circles for shapes, small ones. On the syringes, we could say those are very tiny, thin rectangles for shapes, I suppose. Although excluding the bottom part, of course. What could we describe it with better than rectangles? Because, you know, that would be excluding the bottom part of it. Let's just say they have this very thin shape, very long and thin shape. I think it's better than calling it a rectangular shape. So so there's a lot of that through many angles. But those are like, if you look at things in separate, if you try to look, for example, at the silhouette of the gun, you're gonna usually find this, as you expect, a gun shape with like a barrel and a handle. Through many angles, that's the shape we see. It is a gun after all. If you look in front of the gun, we're gonna see another hexagon, I guess, and a circle. Some thin shapes, somewhat thin, I don't know, but a lot of geometry, a lot of geometrical shapes, lack of curvature. So yeah, I think that's a fair enough analysis here for everything in general. Okay, I guess this part we see some curvature. I hadn't paid too much attention before, but here we have this. It would be kind of oblong with a thinner part. Perhaps there is a better name even, but anyway. And yeah, but I guess that's gonna be it for my analysis on the shapes. So a lot of geometrical shapes, rectangular and trapezoidal shapes. What else? We have like thin shapes for the needles, some hexagons and circles on specific spots. Oops, there we go. And also looking at the silhouette of the gun, we have the barrel plus handle, calling attention to itself on many angles, most of them really, except like when you look directly in front of the gun, it can be harder to notice those shapes, right? But still, I think that's a good enough analysis. Let's move on to forms. So for forms, again, forms are about three-dimensionality. We have a number of prismatic forms here. So what's a trapezoidal shape in 2D becomes a prismatic form in 3D. For example, this bottom underside part of the gun. What else? Also, we have this hexagonal, not sure if you should say, if it's right to say hexagonal cylinder, probably not, but this is a polygon, I suppose you can call it, for the, hello, welcome to Dark PT. This is like a polygon part for the part that houses the syringes. What else for farms? A lot of like flat surfaces on many parts of it, right? What else? There is not that many edged parts. There's not smoothed parts. Okay, let me rephrase that. There are many edges, but they are a bit. They're not sharp edges, as I see it. Many like softer edges. Or maybe I'm reading a bit too much into it, but anyway, I believe we can say that there are a lot of edges in any case. What else for the farms here? Flatness, edges, a lot of prisms, some cylindrical forms over here on this part, and over here on the barrel of the gun, I suppose. Also this detail here on the handle of it, right? I'm not sure there is anything else for me to talk about for the farms here. I think that's a good enough analysis. Some farms. So let's move on to space now. The element of space. Well, as I mentioned before, we have this, right? There's this very tight space between on the handle of the gun, almost imperceptible. But I think it concerns to the element of space here. There is in general a lot of tightness in the visual space because of all the smaller parts of this gun, like on the trigger there is all these tight spaces on this part here, on the back of the gun, on this part here with the barrel of the gun. I don't know if there's like two barrels or something, probably, no, that doesn't make sense, probably like just the bottom one is the proper barrel of the gun, the other is just for support probably. But in any case, a lot of tight spaces, right, for the many smaller parts that were assembled in this gun. And what else? I think that's mostly it, right? Just tightness is how the space is mostly used. Due to all the details, I guess. And so, especially on the parts near the handle, near the trigger, near the back of the gun and the front of it. So on this other side part here would be in general there's no use of space in general, right? And similar for the container of the syringes. So yeah, let's now move on to the element of texture, which is all about the surfaces of things, of parts, of different parts of the artwork, how do they look. So for example, if I stop at this angle, you can kind of make out the details on the surface here. This would be somewhat of a dirty texture, not sure if dirty, it's more like slight imperfections on the metal, right, I think. One is a bit more, has some slight differences in color apparently than the other, but I think it's more about this the texture rather than color, which is another element of art. But regardless of this part here, now we're gonna talk about these parts at the edges of it, which I mentioned before, that we could look at it as lines, but I said that I was going to consider them as textures. And this would be some like slightly degraded textures, right? Like from use of this gun, perhaps over time, stuff like that. Now that I look at it, perhaps this is just like a dirty texture of something dirty on the gun, comparing to some similar texture over here. I don't know. But well, other than that though, I don't see many textures on the syringe gun. I guess there's something like this here, but in general there's just a lot of smoothness and smoothness and lack of textures. You can have smooth textures, but in this case, I guess we can also call them metallic. I think they gave off a metallic vibe as far as the textures of it go. And anything else as far as the textures go, not sure. I think for sure can be sometimes a bit economic thanks for the follow, Mr. X5005. So T4 sure can sometimes be a bit economic on the use of textures. And I think what I said is mostly the textures I see. So just to recap, some metallic and or dirty texture on this underside part of the syringe gun and on the handle, and I think on this part here. And some kind of like slightly degraded one on the edges of it, from use over time, stuff like that. Not sure I see other examples of texture here. Maybe there are somewhere, but I haven't noticed, I don't know. Let's just move on to another element of art. How about, there's only 2 missing now. Let's go for color. So color is one of the easiest elements of art to analyze, I would say, if you like to take on art critiquing. Here's the tip for you. For the color here, we can talk about the black here. There is a shade of black for many parts of the gun. There's also similarly shades of gray for other parts of the gun. So shades of black like for the handle, this underside part of it. What else? Shades of gray for the trigger and the many mechanisms tied to it. Also gray for this back part here. There is somewhat of is it teal? Some sort of teal color on the, what's the name of this? The hexagon capping, I don't know. Naturally also red for the parts of the container that houses the syringes, and what else? Mostly it, I believe, and white for the syringes themselves. So we have roughly 5 colors in total, right? Mostly the black and the gray are the most iconic, noticeable colors to me. And after that, we have the tails in white, red, and teal. So that's it for colors. Let's move on to the element of value, which is the last one that we haven't talked about yet. So value is all about light and darkness, shades and shadiness and brightness. And the way that Valve has made this gun here, the presentation of it, we can like wiggle it around and change how the light reflects from it, right? But so it depends on the angle, but I'm gonna be considering it as a whole as much as I can, trying to broad stroke it, as I like to say. So depending on the angle, there is some very noticeable light brightness, right, being reflected from it, especially on the black parts, perhaps ironically, on the handle and the underside part. What else? But also here, depends a lot on the angle, right, because of the presentation here. But here also, so depending on the angle, there is here also, there is these spots of intense brightness, because the thing's supposed to be black, but the light's reflecting it so much that it appears a bit of a white, you know. So that's my first analysis on the brightness, intense brightness, depending on the angle here. With some shadows to accompany that, I suppose. But I don't know. The shadows, am I going to say what I usually say here? I think so, yeah. I also believe, like, oops, let me see to this angle. Maybe not. I was going to say that the shadows are mild and we can see details, but not that much this time, right? Because it's not that easy to see the textures on this angle with all the light reflecting from it, so maybe I want to make that part of my analysis this time. But there's not much else to talk about, I think, honestly. As I see it here, it's just that, like for value, depending on the angle, on many angles there's some intense brightness reflecting from the syringe gun, but other than that there is not much of use of value in the first place, being on other uses of brightness and shadiness. Okay, I guess, okay, maybe we have like small shades on these junctions of parts of the gun. Like here I just realized, okay, there are some use of shades for the details. I just realized some smaller shades. So fair enough. I think that's it. Okay, so intense. So to recap, intense brightness depending on the angle, and some small shades being tied to some details in smaller parts of the gun. That was the analysis. Let's move on to the interpretation. So first things first. The obvious. This was designed as a gun for the Medic 1442. That's gonna be the first idea for my interpretation of the creative vision. Always important because it would be kind of irresponsible of us to ignore the context, the fact that this is part of a game. What else? Also considering stuff like the name Syringe gun, the fact that there are a bunch of syringes. I think it's like also another easy interpretation to add the notion of this was a gun. This was like a gun that's supposed to shoot syringes, you know. So, and that's the idea behind this gun, the creative vision behind it. It's that a gun that shoots syringes. So, Medic Weapon 1442, a gun that shoots syringes. What else? Those are like some easy stuff to think about, but if we would try to dig a little bit deeper. I don't know. I think I'm just gonna talk about the design of the gun. As I interpret, I think they wanted this gun to have some sort of unique design because of the very idea of a gun that shoots syringes. Because technically they just could make like a revolver, but in game when you press the button, a syringe get out of it. But I see like some very unique mechanisms for this gun, you know, which ties very well with the different nature of it. That shoots is not bullets but syringes. So, but I think that was also part of the creative vision here. So some unique design, unique set of mechanisms for the gun to work. Not sure I would add more for this interpretation. I wanted the primary weapon for the medic, the one that shoots syringes, something with a very unique design. I don't know. I guess I'm gonna stick to those ideas for the interpretation. So three of them. Make a weapon for the medic on T42. Make a gun that shoots syringes, and for that to be the idea, you know, and for its design to be unique and different with unique mechanisms, different from more well-known guns, let's say. So those are the three ideas for the creative vision that I'm interpreting. So let's move on to the judgment step. Now I'm gonna talk about the principles of art, which basically are refer to how the elements were used by the author, the elements of art. And so by comparing the principles of art here, how the elements of art were used with the creative vision, we can see how well are they working together, you know. So how well what the creator did is helping to reach what he said, what was his creative vision, you know. So for this art critique, I'm gonna be considering 6 principles of art: movement, unity, contrast, emphasis, balance, and proportion. So let's begin. Why not go with emphasis as the first one? As always, helps me to remember the rest. So emphasis, so movement. So the principle of movement, by the way, it has nothing to do with animations. It's about how a work of art can naturally move your eyes in some sort of path or direction. Dragon Ball Z, the manga, is a very good example of that, where the panels that easily, naturally guide your eyes to the next panel, and that panel to the next panel, that panel to the next panel. An example of the principle of movement being used there by the author Akira Toriyama. Also, just arrow signs in real life, you know, for traffic. That's kind of also a way to slightly move your eyes around in some direction. So for the principle of movement for the syringe gun, let's see here. Okay, to me I see it strongly on two parts of the art here. One is on this underside part of the gun, which has a bit of a lengthier proportion, let's say. And to me it slightly moves my eyes to the extent of the gun. That's one spot where I see the principle of movement. The other is on the syringes themselves, on their shapes specifically, with the, you know, with the bottom part and then the thin tube and then the thicker part and then the needle at the end. So, that's moving my eyes in the direction of the needles, to the pointy end of the needles, let's say. And so that's where I sit more strongly here, on this underside part and the needles. So does any of that help are tied to the idea of making a weapon for the medic or for the shoe? You know, we could talk a little bit about that, because I mentioned movement on the syringes, and you would expect possibly a medic to use syringes for something. You know, that's an easy logic, I guess, easy conclusion to arrive to. So there is something of it there. I guess we have that going on. Basically, the only thing is that this argument relies on the medic being designed before the syringe gun. If they were designing both classes, both the gun and the class, if the gun came first, for example, it would be kind of weird, because the medic doesn't use syringes actually, you know, it's just a part of the gun. The medic heals his patients with the, where is it? The medigun instead. So even though syringes are, you know, easily just conceptually, I think, tied to the context of medicine, there are no mechanics tied to syringes themselves, but I think that's fine. I think just the idea of medics ought to apply something with a syringe on you, or maybe extract your blood for a blood test, stuff like that. I think that's good enough of a link, let's say. So I suppose it is helping with that. So what else for the creative vision? What about the ideas of a weapon that shoots syringes? Oh well, if the principle of movement is on the syringes themselves, so if it was a deliberate choice by the creator to do something that's tied to this idea of shooting syringes, you know, working well for that. And finally, the idea of a unique design for a gun with different mechanisms. So I wouldn't say the syringes themselves tied to that, because the syringes are inside of the gun, and just looking at the syringes I don't see them, I don't pay attention to the mechanisms of the gun. And the other option is this underside part, which, you know, could, I don't know if there are other guns with some similar part of it, but it doesn't seem that unique and to me, and different, and something that iconic. You know, would you call this iconic for the syringe gun? Necessarily. It's kind of subjective at the end of the day, but as I see it, I don't think that's that unique enough to warrant that, so principle of movement is not helping with that part of the vision. Let's move on to another principle of art. Let's go for unity this time. Unity/variety. Unity, which is all about how different parts of the artwork can can look like they're working together in one way or another. Many ways to accomplish that: continuity, repetition, proximity, patterns, rhythms. And there's also variety, which is basically the opposite of unity. And so in either, we kind of talk about all of them together. Either can, at least that's how I do it, either can be helpful for the creative vision. So first things first, where do I see unity/variety here? Well, I guess a lot of unity on the many geometrical shapes and forms. As I said before, a lot of trapezoidal and rectangular shapes, and prismatic and ideas and geometrical forms. I was thinking, I didn't say anything. Okay, like a prism is the 3D of the trapezoidal shape, let's say, but I didn't say anything about the rectangles, but that's because I don't see it would be a blocky shape, but I don't see many blocky forms. I don't see block forms, but I see rectangular shapes here, somewhat. So that's an interesting exception this time. For example, yesterday on Upward there was rectangular shapes and blocky forms. This time I see rectangular shapes, but not blocky forms. So cool to notice. But anyway, for Unity, as I said, I see with the repetition and proximity of the shapes and forms, rectangular and trapezoidal shapes and prismatic forms. Also there is continuity and repetition in the use of color, in the shade of black for the underside part of the gun, the muzzle and the other parts of it, also the trigger, the handle. And then some also for the trigger, how it connects, the trigger itself connects to other parts of it. So those are it. And how the shades of grey have some repetition here and a little bit of continuity. So all of that are examples of Unity. For variety, I could mention the colors. The teal is noticeable and red for their variety. The white technically is a source of variety, but it's not too far from the grey, right, I would say. For variety, there is also the unique, very unique, minute details of the forms and shapes of especially the forms of the mechanism of the gun. This set of tubes and this small gap over here, and also the use of spaces. Also, there's a lot of variety there. I said there's a lot of tight spaces, but they are all different between each other, right? And what else? So yeah, that's where I see variety. A lot of unique, minute details for the different parts of the gun. And so, okay, with all that said, does any of that tie to the idea of a gun for the Medic 1442? Let's see here. Okay, this is not to me the strongest source, the strongest showcase example of Unity here, but but there is some on the repetition and and even pattern in this case of the syringes. They are repeated one on top of the other, and all of them have followed this pattern of patterns in their shapes and colors of the bottom part, then white, then red, then long white part, then red. So due to there is some unity there. So that naturally makes us think on the syringes, and thus is helping with the vision. What else? With that idea of the vision, because of what I said, right? Because if you think about syringes, I'm gonna consider that reasonable enough for the context of medicine, the medic using it and stuff like that. So yeah. What else? What about the idea of this gun being some sort of device that shoots syringes? Again, if there are syringes inside of it, we can see it and stuff like that. It's helping. A little tough experiment for you guys. If this was completely covered, with, I don't know, this is a transparent glass, right? If this was opaque, you could not see the syringes. Would this look like it shoots syringes? It's called syringe gun. We would kind of need to go see it in game, in action, right? So because just visually it wouldn't. at least to me, it wouldn't easily communicate that idea. So I would consider the idea of making this a glass with the syringes being visible very wise on the part of Valve for the artwork here. But anyway, just my thoughts on this. Moving on, so yeah, for the idea of this gun being some sort of device to shoot syringes, the principle of Unity is helping. And finally, what about the idea of a unique device that is different with unique mechanisms and stuff? Easy, right? For what I said of variety, ties very well with that idea, right? Because of how unique these are in comparison to, I don't know, mere revolver, for example, you know. What is similar is naturally the layout, the broader layout of the gun. Handle, trigger, barrel, muzzle, you know. That's like similar to other guns, but stuff like all these connected gray parts here are pretty unique for a gun. This part in the front of it, which it almost looks like it has a double barrel, but even though the top one I think is just for support. So all of that has a unique design to it, and those are sources of variety, as I said, so, you know, I see that as contributing to that creative vision thus. So yeah, let's move on now to the principle of contrast. So contrast, how about differences in the artwork, how did their difference affect that artwork as a whole. For contrast, yeah, I'm probably, to me I think the greatest source is between the container of the syringes and the rest of the gun, in general, the metal parts of the gun. There are differences in color, black versus the red and the translucid glass. There is the amount of detail, we could say. It would be, in this case, the elements of shapes. There's a bunch of syringes with minute details and colors, and in comparison to the flatter surface here with not much to show. What else? I think mostly that, because even on the forms, okay, so I mentioned the shapes of the syringe, but on the forms and shapes of the container itself and the other parts of the gun, I see some similarities actually. But I think the differences that I mentioned are enough to, for me, bring it the greatest amount of contrast. That's what I see it. So the container and the rest of the parts of the gun, the metal parts of the gun. So does any of that help with the idea of a gun for the Medic 1442? Now it's kind of tricky, right? Because it's not the syringes themselves, it's the whole container. I mean, maybe it's alright, right? Maybe if there's contrast, if the container houses the syringes, there's a lot of them. It's a part of how the contrast is being achieved, I would say. So I guess it's fair to call this again, to say that the contrast is helping that idea of the vision, because we're looking at the syringes, not only to the syringes this time, but I think it's fair to consider the syringes and the container as a whole, both things, one of them at least helping with the idea of the medic and stuff, and the contrast being what's doing that, helping to do that. So what about the idea of a gun that shoots syringes? Well, again, same logic, right? Although this time you could say that since there is a whole container housing the syringes, I think that helps a bit better, because now it's almost like the cylinder of a gun, right? Yeah, that makes total sense. The cylinder of a gun, for example, on the heaviest minigun, the cylinder is down this part here where the bullets are held, and for the syringe gun there is none of that, but instead there is what would be basically the cylinder of a gun, but it shoots syringes, so maybe this should literally be called the cylinder of the gun. very interesting to think about. Also, by the way, don't mix that up with the barrel of the gun, which is the part where the bullets come out of, and the muzzle after that. But anyway, I see the contrast here helping convey the idea that this is a device that shoots syringes. And finally, what about the idea of some unique design, unique set of mechanisms for this gun? To have this sort of container, in this case full of syringes, is unique. I'll give it that. And although, again, thanks for the follow, not so epic game out. So I don't think this part down here is that unique, you know, there's some uniqueness to it, but naturally I think the container itself would be more of it. And so, yeah, it's not I think the mechanisms are something even more unique, but I guess you wouldn't expect some sort of glass containers for a gun, so I guess that's also helping with that part of the creative vision, that idea. Okay, so let's move on now to the principle of emphasis. Emphasis is all about some part of the art keeping your eyes there, like bringing your eyes and having some sort of focus there. You can also think about it as hierarchy. Some authors even differentiate between the two. If you think about hierarchy, then you can think about multiple of these, and it's like the biggest focus and then a smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm gonna be considering emphasis and hierarchy the same here for this critique, but anyway. So where do I see emphasis here? For the syringe gun, well, this one's kind of tough, I would say. Because there are many parts of details and the way they have laid about like bigger parts with the amount of details that they have. I would say, for example, like the underside parts by far not gonna be it, but the rest is so visually loaded on many parts because of the many mechanisms of the gun. But I guess I will say that the cylinder itself that houses the syringes are where I see emphasis for this gun, although not by a lot, honestly. Some other guns, other arts, I think the emphasis is stronger, but for this one, especially considering the size of the container, I think it's what helping, in this more specifically the forms of the container, the form, I think is what helping convey emphasis for me. And so yeah, okay, with that said, does that help in some way or another to convey that this is a gun for the medic for Team Fortress 2? Again, the logic for the syringes, because of the context of medicine and all that, and since there is emphasis on the cylinder the cylinder that houses the syringes, that's kind of a mouthful. You know, I think that's helping easily. And again, if this was an opaque cylinder, then I wouldn't say that, because we wouldn't see the syringes. But in this case, they did a good idea. What are you doing? I'm doing an art critique on this, basically, on the syringe gun of the medic. At the end of it, I'm gonna call this either successful or unsuccessful artwork, based on what I've been talking about so far. So, okay, so yeah, thus the emphasis here is helping with that idea of that, saying that this is a gun for the medic for Team Fortress 2. What about the idea of that a gun that shoots syringes, that specific idea? So again, easy, right? If there is emphasis on the cylinder that houses the syringes, then that's naturally tied to the creative visual, so helping with that also. And things are kind of repeating themselves a bit right now, right? But let's just move on with it. And finally, what about the idea of a unique mechanism, a unique gun that differentiates itself from other guns and stuff? I already said that, but the cylinder itself being something that I at least personally consider unique for a gun, I think it's helping convey that. So again, contributing to the creative vision when it comes to that. Let's talk about a different principle of art now. Let's talk about the principle of balance. Balance is all about some sort of equilibrium or tension being portrayed in the artwork in some way or another. How even or uneven that equilibrium is, or the tension, is it going to break or something? That's what we're going to be looking for here. And like many Team Fortress 2 assets and art, I think this is like balanced. Don't think I see any sort of bending parts or parts that look like they're being tensioned or anything. It's sometimes we see it right a little bit, but in this case I'm not sure I'm gonna find any. In general, this whole gun is like balanced. Don't take that out of context. There's the idea of game balance instead. No, visually balanced. Okay, visually I believe this gun is in general balanced. Don't think I see any. If there would be any sort of tension, perhaps on this part of the trigger. Not sure. Maybe not. Maybe not. So since this is like in general balanced, visually balanced. I say in general because maybe like some very small detail could be unbalanced here, and I'm not seeing it. That's what I mean here. But yeah. Anyway, does any of that help with the idea of gun for the medic for Team Fortress 2? I don't think so. That would be quite a stretch, as I see it. You would expect guns to be something balanced, I guess, you know, that are not something that are going to break at any moment or that are being tensioned by anything. But I think that's not like a strong gun-off link, conceptually speaking. I don't think the equilibrium of a gun's design is the most defining factor of it. Let alone one for specifically for Team Fortress 2, specifically for the medic. So yeah. What about the idea of this being a gun that shoots syringes, something like that, or a device that shoots syringes? I guess I don't care too much about being a gun specifically because I already mentioned a gun for the medic for Team Fortress 2. So again, the balance, I don't see that tied to that idea. If anything, you would expect some sort of mechanism to happen, and maybe the mechanism involves some sort of tension, right? But in this case, visually, I don't see that tension. So, you know, don't get me wrong, probably there is some force that propels the syringes forward, and we could say there is some tension going on there, but visually I don't see it. Possibly, when I say there's some tension going on, there's possibly some tension going on. I don't think that's even necessarily the case. But anyway, yeah, I don't see it as helping with the creative vision on that idea. And finally, what about a unique mechanism with hello, how are you doing? What about a unique mechanism, something that it's very different from other guns, some very unique and exquisite design? Again, the visual balance here I don't think is contributing to that. If anything, I believe something exquisite doesn't need to be unbalanced or tensioned, but I guess it wouldn't hurt because a lot of designs, a lot of our design involves something balanced and stable, you know, because we don't want things to break. So if you're going to find something exotic, I think some sort of tension or imbalance kind of helps, but not necessarily. Also, I don't think you need for something to be unbalanced to be exotic. But in this case, it's neither. To me, it's neither exotic nor unbalanced, and so I don't see that principle helping with the creative vision here, with that idea. So yeah, let's move on to the final principle of art for me to talk about here, the principle of proportion, which is about the sizes of things, of different parts of the art here, and about that. So one thing that I do usually is try to place things in scales of how big they are, because that helps, I think. For example, we could say that this underside part of the gun and the cylinder are on one sort of scale, and the steel parts on a smaller scale. That's one thing that I usually do. The syringes are on a smaller scale. But after yesterday, when I was doing the art critique for the payload, upward, I realized that it kind of gets weird on scenarios where one dimension of the thing, let's say, is way bigger than the others. Specifically, the payload's rails basically are somewhat small on one dimension, but their length is gigantic, right? So yeah, that's kind of a proportion problem, let's say, things to figure out. And so for this here, I will still do that, try to look at with the scales, try to look at the biggest things and the smallest things, try to kind of to figure out the scale for them. But I will also consider specific dimensions. So in this case, let's do the following. I'm going to add the underside thing and the cylinder as like the biggest scales for the gun here. After that, other parts like the handle and the trigger and the muzzle of the gun, I think I could add that to a smaller scale. And finally, details like the TO cap thing here and the syringes, I think I will be placing on the smallest scale. So we have 3 scales here. And also, if I'm thinking about specific dimensions for the proportions, I suppose the underside again has a considerable length to it, similar to the handle. And what else? Let's leave it at that. That's noticeable to me for their proportions in that dimension in comparison to the rest of the parts of the art here. Okay, so with all that said, does any of that help convey the idea that this is a gun for the medic for Team Fortress 2? When it comes to the proportions, okay, I think so. This time, because of I'm gonna be very forgiving here, and just say that the proportions of the underside and the handle, and I guess the trigger also, are what you would expect for the proportions of a gun, you know, in relation to their parts. Like, for example, if you again compare it to the pistol, to the revolver, we have a longer barrel of the gun, also a smaller handle and an even smaller trigger, and that pattern of proportions, let's say, is followed here. We have a longer barrel of the gun, after that slightly smaller handle, and finally an even smaller trigger. So we have those proportions that are tying to the idea that this is a gun. Naturally, I'm not talking about a gun specifically for Team Fortress 2 for the medic, I'm just talking about a gun. But then again, I have never found any iconic traits of guns for Team Fortress 2 as a whole. Something like, I don't have like a logo on all guns saying TF2, you know, something that all guns on TF2 always have. No, they vary a lot in their design, and I don't see any defining features for the guns of the Fortress 2 like outside of things like the design of the game as a whole, like a lot of square shapes, let's say, for example, that I think goes for Thirsty 2 as a whole. But anyway, yeah. So, and then there's also the what about? But could we say that this is again for the medic? For the proportions, I don't see the proportions helping specifically, because even I did mention that I would consider this underside part of the gun and the cylinder as on the same scale, but you know that doesn't say much. If the cylinder had its own scale, I think that would help to convey a bit by its proportion, to make it more easy to see and understand that this is a weapon for the medic. But you know, since it's sharing the scale with the underside part here, I don't see that. But as I said, but I still think it's helping. Being just conveying that this is a gun, I think it's good enough for that part of the vision. After that, what about the notion that this is a gun that shoots syringes? Okay, or a device that shoots syringes, something more specific now, right? Does the proportion help with that in any way? Don't think so. I suppose we could also talk about the length of the syringes inside the cylinder. I didn't mention that before, right? But there's also a proportion there. And I suppose that's like typical for syringes, that's very specific proportion. If we had supposedly a syringe that's very fat and large, it would be weird. Technically, I guess you could make a syringe like that, but it wouldn't help communicate the fact that this is a syringe, because usually syringes have this iconic shape and proportions, right? So I guess the proportions of the syringe are helping to communicate that they are syringes. You know, they're not weird syringes. They are easy. They are your run-of-the-mill syringes. So you lose a bit of variety, I guess, and uniqueness, but you get more, make it easier to recognize, more identifiable. So I guess it's helping with my interpreted creative vision. And finally, what about the idea of something unique, some unique design, different design from other types of guns, stuff like that. When it comes to the proportions, don't think so, again. Don't think so. I did mention, when I was placing things in scales, I mentioned the underside part and the cylinder, and then I mentioned stuff like the handle and the different mechanisms. But sorry, not the mechanisms, the handle, the trigger, and the muzzle. But I don't know, only some of them I think are somewhat unique, specifically the trigger and the muzzle. But the handle is pretty well. Okay, the handle is in general normal, but I do suppose there is this detail here on the underside part of it. Maybe I should consider the proportions as helping. If like everything that has the same set of sizes, the same scales, are unique, and is that thus contributing? Does that logic stand? Maybe having a scale of its own for the main unique parts of the gun, are they unique and all of them on the same scale? Yeah, maybe those proportions are helping. Just thinking for a second here. Okay, yeah, sure. That's what I'm going to say for this critique at least, that the different parts here, the handle, the trigger and the muzzle, all having unique designs and being like a scale of their own, that contributes to convey that this is a unique weapon. So, okay, that was it for all principles. So now I can finally pass judgment. considering everything, a lot of the principles helped with the creative vision, right? At least one principle covered each of the, yeah, all of the, each idea of the vision was covered by at least one principle, so I must say this is thus a successful work of art. Congratulations, creators of the Syringe gun. I think you managed to convey everything you wanted to convey. Seems like a good deal. Good job, good design. That was it for today's art critique. Hope you enjoy it. Hooray!